Thank you. My wife and I have made a choice to try and avoid doing this and stay in the present and really value this time in our lives. And I encourage people to do that because it goes by so quickly. I mean, when you're a teenager, you think you can do anything, and you generally do. And your 20s are a blur. Your 30s, you make a little money, maybe raise a little family, and wonder what the hell happened to my 20s. Your 40s, you might grow a second chin, maybe get a pot belly, and the music starts to get too loud. And one of your girlfriends or boyfriends from high school becomes a grandparent. Your 50s, you have a minor surgery. You'll call this a procedure, but it's a surgery. Your 60s, you'll have a major surgery. The music will still be too loud, but it won't matter because you won't be able to hear it anyway. Your 70s, you and your significant other will retire. You'll start having dinner at 2 in the afternoon, lunch at 10 in the morning, and breakfast the night before. You'll start mumbling to yourself, how come the kids don't call anymore? Your 80s, you'll have a major stroke, and you end up battling some nurse who your husband or wife hates and who you call mom. I use that monologue by Billy Crystal from the movie City Slickers because most of us have become city slickers, city dwellers. We depend on the city for our food, water, and shelter. And what gets the food, water, and shelter to us are fossil fuels. And so it's very typical for us to live this way. It's not very typical for people who live outside of the industrial culture or who are oppressed by the industrial culture. What's typical to us is a world of Facebook and Twitter, oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico, islands of plastic floating twice the size of Texas or 6 times the size of the UK, depression, suicide, iPhones, iPads, iPods, iTunes, double-dip recession, stock portfolios, species extinction, global climate change, and of course, boredom. I was recently in Uganda, and I was with a group of people, and we were touring a school, and the children were putting on different skits of singing and dancing and poetry. And one of the poems had a line in it, and I was filming this. It was a line that hit me like a punch in the stomach. The children said, "Thank you, white people, for taking away our boredom." And that's when it hit me that I live in a culture that not only promotes, packages, and sells the idea of boredom, but we also claim we have the antidote. And this is the result. And so I came back to my life, and I started to really reevaluate, what am I doing? How am I participating in this? And I was a teacher, and my wife's a teacher, and so we started to go, well, what are we really doing? We're preparing people to literally strive and succeed in a world, in a culture, I should say, that in essence is devouring the planet. And so I really had to reevaluate what I was doing. And so my wife and I decided to chase a different carrot. We sold our car, got rid of most of our belongings, left our teaching careers, strapped what's needed to our backs, and are in search of a skill set, something we know nothing about, to learn how to grow food, secure water, and build durable, sustainable shelter. And if we're fortunate enough to find a community where we can share our lives with. Most people in this culture think that's, well, a bit strange. We think it's an act of inherent privilege. Because I live in a world where Billy Joel claims we didn't start the fire, where REM warns us it's the end of the world as we know it, and Matchbox 20 wants to see just how far we've come. Well, just how far have we come when many of us believe that infinite growth on a finite planet is not only possible and somehow adds up, but we count on stores for our food, we drink water out of bottles, and we pay to keep a roof over our heads. Where once we were all capable, privilege has really created a disconnect. And so what do I mean by this, by inherent privilege? Well, I was born a white heterosexual male raised by middle-class educated Christian parents. I am able-bodied. I was born in the United States. And I live in a culture that was built upon and is maintained by inherent privilege. And the important part of that is the geography. I was born in the United States, which has become the most wealthy, powerful country the world has ever known. And how did it get to be that way? Well, besides revolution, it gained its territory by the genocide, displacement, and rounding up of native people. It gained its economic foothold by the exploitation of immigrant workers and the kidnapping, enslavement, displacement, and murder of millions of Africans. And all of this was done under the leadership of white men. And so the privilege that I have gained is that I don't have to think about racism unless I really want to. I certainly don't have to think about patriarchy unless I really want to. And I don't have to think about things like homophobia or heterosexism unless I want to. And then when it becomes uncomfortable, I just stop thinking about them. But people that live outside of my social categories, they not only have to think about them, they live them. It's called oppression. And so what's happened is inherent privilege, in my estimation, has given birth to a culture where we don't have to think about how our food gets to us, how our water gets to us, or how our shelter gets to us. They just happen. I show up to the store and there's food. I turn on the tap, water comes out. I just buy a house. I have no idea how it gets there. And these are the hidden relationships I'm starting to talk about. So if we just look at the computer that I put this slideshow together on, the materials were probably mined by exploited miners in what we call, in our culture, the developing world. Then the carcinogenous computer chips were put together, assembled by poor women in places like Vietnam or China. And then it was shipped via many vehicles running on fossil fuels, putting carbon into the air, not to mention what those vehicles were made out of and how they were mined, and the ecosystems they may have touched, the people they may have exploited, the species they may have eliminated. Then it shows up to a store where I go and drive my car to get it. And I buy it for somebody who's probably underpaid because we got to make a profit, of course. And that's how it works. And then I use it for a few years and I get rid of it. I have no idea where it goes. It probably goes into some landfill, not near my neighborhood, but where poor people live. And then it gets buried in there and it poisons their drinking water. And I become used to this. I mean, I don't have time to learn how to grow food or to secure water or build shelter. I have a job. I have a career. And for me, part of that became the problem, is I become so dependent on everything else, on this giant tower that we've built, that I don't know how to do the basic things. And that really started to bother me, because what happened was I began to feel entitled to this way of life. And entitlement looks and sounds like this. You know, your internet's too slow, your cell phone coverage sucks, things are too expensive. You want fruit in all times of the year, all seasons. And people go, well, Mike, you know, I work hard for my goods and services. This is an entitlement. I've earned them. Well, my question back to people when they ask me that is, I ask, did all parties agree to your social contract? Did the ecosystems agree? Did the species that are being eliminated agree? Did the people that are being oppressed and exploited for their work agree that because you worked hard, you get these things, without knowing how they got to you? And so it goes on. And because I feel entitled, well, the world looks a certain way to me. What it does is it distorts my boundaries. It turns my perspective into the truth. This is the way all people live, right? And if they don't, well, they should. Those 1 billion people that don't have clean drinking water, well, we got to get them on board. Those 2 billion people that don't have access to electricity, well, they got to start living like this. We need to do something. And so the world looks a certain way to me because we figured this is the way everybody should live. The world may look like, I don't know, a duck. But then you travel to places like Uganda, maybe, or Nicaragua, and you start to listen to people instead of telling them how it is, and you start to look at the way they do things. They realize you know the world looks like a duck, but they know the world works differently for them. And so when someone like me starts to look at the duck long enough, and if I really start to listen to those people, I see that it's not just a duck. And that in fact, it's a rabbit. And once you see the rabbit, well, you can do one or two things. You can change the way you're doing things, or you can ignore it. I am trying to change how I do things. It has not been simple. And so, because my truth has been distorted, and I now think other people have perspectives and I have the truth, well, then I move on and I continue to objectify the living world. Trees are no longer trees to me, they're lumber. Land is no longer land, it's property or it's a development. Poor people are lucky to have a job. And then what I do is I start to compartmentalize the world. I don't see any relationships between anything anymore. Nothing relates, by the way I maybe have treated people in the past, may relate to how we treat people today, which could relate to how we treat women, or how we treat people who we consider to live outside of the industrial world, or how we treat what we call food, and how that relates to species that are not even animals. And so business as usual goes on. We continue to create a lot of crap. We wonder why the results never change. And we create a mess. And what that ultimately gives us is a sense that we are somehow superior. We have risen above. We are no longer part of nature. We have conquered nature. We have given ourselves purpose through our religions, our sciences, our arts, our education system, our leaders. They all tell us this place is for us. And so we treat it as such. And what that ultimately does is leads to violence and destruction of the only planet we have. There's no Earth 2 around the corner as far as I know. And so this becomes a little, obviously, depressing, to say the least, when you start to really wrap your mind about what we're doing on a daily basis from the moment we wake up and hit the light switch to all the activity during the day and hitting the light switch at night, what our day is full of and what we're unaware of happening and how our things come to us. And so if we put it all together, it looks like this. I was born in the United States. I have some privilege. I feel entitled to the way things are, which allows me to see the world in a different way. It distorts my perspective. I believe this is the way to do things, which allows me to objectify and compartmentalize the world. And that leads to a sense of superiority and purpose, which can destroy the living planet. What can we do? You know, it's such an enormous thing to take on. And so what I've done throughout my life is I get stuck, like most people do, into the awareness and hope mode. I'm aware that things are bad. I mean, I go to TEDTalks. I watch the right documentaries. I'm well-read. I talk to people. I read a lot online. And I'm certainly hopeful that a certain piece of technology will get us out of this. Maybe we can vote for the right person. We sign the right online petition. We give to the right charities. But the entire time I'm doing that, I'm never actually taking a step towards the exit of what I consider to be a destructive culture and taking responsibility. My good friend Calvin Terrell says, we don't have a choice whether we were born into oppression or privilege, but do we have a responsibility for the life we lead? And if not, why not? And if so, what is it? Well, part of my responsibility is to speak truth to power. And power is what I see when I look at the culture that most of us partake in. And so my wife and I have decided to chase a different carrot. And we go to different farms and we work on homesteads to learn how to grow food, secure water, and build shelter. And so what do we do? Well, I've learned two things from two young people in the last few years, one just recently. What you can do is you can find out what your community needs. Can you offer a skill set to your community to help move away towards a destructive situation, to say the least? Is there something you can offer? Is there some sort of skill you have, or is there some sort of void you see in your own community that you could fill or prepare yourself to fill? And so what I've learned is that, and it's been reinforced today, that it's not the oppressed who need to be saved, and it's certainly not the privileged who are going to save the world. I've decided to continue to listen and do my best to listen with humility. And my wife and I have decided to chase a different carrot. And we encourage you to join us. Thank you.